Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
And we are recording. Once again, back is the incredible, rhyme edible Aidan Wachter, back on Weird Web Radio. Glad to have you here, brother.
Thank you, man. It's awesome to be back.
Yeah, figured I'd bust out a little rhyme for you, right?
We got to do what we can, regardless of our skill levels, as I am always proving.
Right. So, in the lead up to the conversation between you and I, getting to this interview, now, of course, you've got a new book out, and I mean, that's kind of the catalyst here, but as anyone knows, the door's always open for you, regardless of books or not.
Thank you.
Yeah. So new book Changeling is out, but you and I have been discussing things in email, and you had some ideas that you wanted to address. I agree with you. I think it's a good time to do so. And before I dive right into that first thing you talked about, to give a little preface to this for people who are listening, I've largely, over the 6 seasons of the show, avoided, for the most part, I think, time stamping it, because I want everything to be about the individual and why you practice and how you get the results you do and how do you handle the doubt and the emotions and the controversy and so on. But I think it's also at a point now, we are in our 3rd year of a global pandemic, and the Western world is doing its utmost best to be at arms with each other. And I just think after the turmoil that we've seen in the U.S. after the elections and the pandemic and what's going on in Eastern Europe right now with Russia, that this is as good a time as any to put a timestamp on something. Right? So let's see, in your email, your exact suggestion as you said it, let people get behind the curtain here on this one, right?
Yeah.
Was given the wildness of the past few days and even the past couple of years, you were talking about wanting to give something people that can make their lives a little bit easier, especially in the wildness and the craziness of these times. And your exact, like in quotes, you say, given how hard things have been for folks over the last couple of years and how that doesn't seem like it's letting up, what can we do to get through these times in better shape? And yeah, that's a great place to start this conversation. I think it's fair and honest and open. What can we do to really take all this in and take care of ourselves too?
Yeah. Yeah. And I come to this very much not having that kind of settled on. It's not like I came in knowing what I was going to say to that either. But I think it needs to be on the table. Because there is such a push. I'm going to digress from where I was going right there. One of the things that I loved about Battlestar Galactica, I don't know if you watched Galactica, the reboot, is there is a continuing thread that comes from the Cylons, because they have they have longer term memory than the humans do, where they say repeatedly, this has all happened before and this will all happen again. And there is a reality to that, I think, because we can look at least as far as human civilization goes, we've run through these things before. What's happening now is very different, but not utterly different than what happened during Roman times or pre-Roman times, smaller scales. But there's a thing that we humans tend to end up doing with and to each other that is, it's just intense. And it warrants looking at, I think, as kind of folks who are spiritual practitioners of some sort, not looking away from that and not getting involved in the kind of demonizing different pieces of the world even when we can say this is, perhaps there's pieces that are unjustifiable, but not then necessarily othering that to the point of going, this is not understandable, or that these people are, I don't know. We have a tendency to want to split into camps, and that is kind of the root of the issue.
Yeah.
And so it becomes kind of to me, it's a counterintuitive move to go, okay, all that's going on, all that's real. An immense number of people have lost family, have lost jobs, have lost resource in the pandemics. Obviously, we have this potentially immense shift of power going on throughout the world. But as kind of individual practitioners, I think we have some power, and I won't deny that we have power. I think we do have power to influence the outer world, but we have way more power to influence ourselves and those close to us. And that's, I think, where my head was at, is like, what can we do to kind of get situated on that ground? Mm-hmm. That, well, this is a new version. This isn't new to our species. Our ancestors have seen versions of this, no matter where they were from. For some of us who are, I'm in my mid-50s, so I grew up very much in the Cold War, and grew up knowing people who were involved in World War II and all that. So there's resonances that may not be as present for somebody who's 30 or 20. And so it just becomes an interesting question to me of what are the tools that you have found? What are the tools that I have found to kind of help get grounded and go, okay, this is what's going on. There's no benefit to not look at it. But there is also no benefit to get caught up in the churn, and so what are the options, or what are some options, or what have we found? And so that comes to me as kind of a question that I would throw to you even, is what do you find during this time that has been helpful for you to kind of center in? Drinking. See, I knew I quit that way too soon.
Yeah. No. Joking aside, thinking of this from our magical perspective, because I know for anyone out there who is involved in magic, witchcraft, sorcery, what have you, paganism, anything, like, it's going to ebb and flow throughout your life, even through your day-to-day activities. For me, I'm more all in. Like, I interact with the world thinking about these things in my practice more often than not. So one thing that I'm always reminding myself of, especially as my day-to-day activity continues as is, with offerings to my ancestors, my allies, honoring the deities that I work with in the unique ways that I, work with them, meditation, centering energy work, marking myself as a crossroads, visiting my power spots and locations that I've cultivated and found. None of that actually changes regardless of what's going on in the world. Access to places and items were a little tricky at times, I guess, during the beginning of the pandemic, as things were shut down for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Just, like, there was kind of a curfew for a while. So just being out at the hours I would be out doing some of these things was already frowned upon. But I mean, I've spent my whole life sneaking in and out of cemeteries when I'm not supposed to be in them. So, nothing new there. And I'm not going to lie. It actually, I found it a little more exciting, to be honest, to be out there, especially during a part of Jason's Sorcery of Hecate course. They call the Procession of the Key. And I work with keys a lot in my magic and my sorcery. And I'm all about connecting them to places. It just makes perfect sense. It's a natural thing for them to do. But, during the lockdown, the Procession of the Key involves going to specific locations to charge this key as you're going. Some of which would raise some eyebrows. Why are you here? Especially after dark. So that was a lot of fun. But all that rambling to say, I'm just constantly reminded all sorcery is local, all of it. And it's that particular mindset that even when things come boiling to my door and I have my problems and I have challenges and things in my life that are upsetting to me, I'm just still reminded that all sorcery is local, even in things that suck in my life right now that are very emotionally challenging or hurtful or hard. Sure, there's outside influences involved in this sometimes, but it's always my responsibility to deal with it because it's at my doorstep. So all sorcery is local, and I'll keep leaning on that rock, and that's what gets me through.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool. Yeah, it is interesting. You know, I due to talking to or chatting with online Jackie Wynn, who is a pagan prison chaplain in the UK, and that she's got some folks that are working with weaving fae and 6 ways in the prison system there. And I'd already been kind of minimizing my stuff. You know, from us talking when I was in the shop, I had this crazy room full of materia and tools and everything. And once I quit making jewelry, I really started backing that down. And talking to Jackie, I backed it all there. After that, I kind of went, okay, how do I actually practice with nothing, essentially? And so now I'm down to a couple of malas and a couple of stones and a knife, you know. I haven't lit a candle in many, many months. I haven't lit incense in over a year.
Oh, wow.
And it's really kind of been helpful for me to kind of go through that process to really strip down to the basics for me. And so for me, that's been, on the practice side, it has been meditation, of course. And it really kind of using that as a way to like lean into the stuff that I'm not comfortable with, rather than not doing concentration meditation or insight meditation as much, but more of a concentration meditation where I'll sit and go, okay, I'm freaked out by this. I'm going to spend an hour getting comfortable with that level of discomfort and see what the root is of that, and see if that is something that I accept as valid. Because most of that stuff I don't end up accepting as valid. Okay, the fact that I'm feeling fear is valid, but is the fear itself real enough in a concrete way? Or is it stories that I'm telling? You know, my fascination with story and all of this stuff. And it's almost always story. The actual practical bits are usually not what freaks me out. It's the imagined stuff. It's the things that I could picture happening, not the things that are actually happening most of the time for me. That's going to be different for people who are in different situations. But so yeah, I've been doing a lot of that. And a lot of, really writing Changeling was a huge process of that. Like, what are the pieces that I've found to be important in keeping myself kind of well and functional, and making myself really kind of dig into those things is like if I would kind of come into you've read the book, so you know that they're in the form of these ideas of qualities. And so it would come into that idea that I've sat with for a long time of like fear as an ally, but then you go, okay, let's take that as far as I can now, and see if I can really get to a place where I go, okay, that's teaching me things about myself more than anything else, which is where I'm at now. Is these are not. It's not that they're ungrounded. It's not that they don't have roots. It's not that there aren't situations where they can be real, but I can see that they are. It's 90% my own construction, if not higher, you know. And then that affects everything else. So I begin to see like that affects my relationships. It affects about how close I'm willing to be with somebody. It affects what I just kind of gloss over. Where do I glaze over? Where do I kind of choose to just step over a piece of information or an experience? And so that's been kind of the meditation focus, is things like that. And really trying to not let it's not about shutting off information from the outside world, but really being aware that all of the narratives are narratives, and not taking them at face value, even if they're coming from people that I agree with or like. Really kind of which is kind of in a specific to the last few years, like of going, like, we really do as a species, there's a chunk of us that really do like to cluster together and take sides, and I'm one of those people. If we've got enough in common, I'm going to think really highly of you. If we have enough not in common, I may not think as highly of you, which is kind of weird. In some cases that's valid, right? But it's, actions speak louder than words. But in some cases it's like I really did have to hop on that questioning of, am I overly protecting myself by letting my fear have too much sway over my situation and over my context? And for me, it's been a lot of walking, a lot of riding my bike, like now that it's viable, getting out into the world and kind of doing that whole moving through space thing. Which is cool. I don't know if we talked about that before, but that's another thing to kind of tap on, which is interesting.
The whole moving in space.
Yeah.
I dig that. Cause one of the big parks here where I live, they have all these really cool walking paths all through it. And they've spent a lot of money developing that. So, I like to roller skate.
Yep.
Full disclosure, I never grew out of that one. Why should you? But the rinks, even here locally, like most of them are still closed. You can rent them out for private parties and things like that. So I got outdoor wheels and real hardcore bearings for them, and threw those on my skates, and was skating through those walking paths for a long time, up until I got the day job,
Right.
Yeah, but I agree. Moving through space, just getting up and active, is a great way to fight back against the growing, I guess, static of just that pressure that mounts on you from so many restrictions that we've dealt with in the last few years.
And it's interesting. I have always been, we've talked about this, I've always been a walker and a runner and a bicyclist. And I've always had this sense that, that my life works better when I'm doing those things. And I always thought that was about the physical exertion, because I'm not really a chill walker. I walk fast. But and when I ran long distance. But looking at, have you dug into the Andrew Huberman podcast?
Yes. In fact, the man's going to ruin my business as a hypnotist. When people call me for anxiety help, and I'm really good at helping people with anxiety. I've helped myself so well with anxiety. Ran into Huberman being interviewed by Joe Rogan, and couldn't believe like how much he just gives away for free. he's like the dude who cured polio, right?
Totally.
Only he's curing anxiety and depression and shit, and he's giving it to the world for free through his Instagram account. So yes, absolutely.
Anyway, he talked about it. He's the first person that I'd seen. I like I said, I've been very aware for probably almost 40 years that I do better when I'm able to get outside and walk or ride my bike or run. But I always thought it was purely physical. And Huberman, when he was talking about, and I never remember what it's the acronym for, but the EMDR therapy, which involves tapping and things like that, or there's multiple ways of doing it. He talks about as far as what they can tell, and for people that don't know, the Huberman Lab podcast is what we're talking about. He's got a really active Instagram account as well that links out to it. He's a former skate punk who became a scientist at Stanford. He's quite a dude. And what he was saying is that they've discovered and have known for quite some time this process that they call optical flow, that something happens to our neurology as we move ourselves through space. So like driving doesn't do it, a motorcycle doesn't do the same thing. You have to be doing it on your own. You have to be moving yourself, but walking, running, riding your bike, I imagine, rolling your wheelchair or whatever. But I think that I don't know why the car doesn't necessarily do it, but he's indicated that it doesn't. And it changes your neurology, and it allows you to let go of things. It basically, what I think is happening is, due to our evolution as animals, that we're always moving through space and not necessarily having the sense of time for most of that we have now. I think that process of moving through space is part of what lets us know that the past is the past. And so when we think about how mucked up everybody gets, locked up, staring at their phones, stuck at home in the pandemic or whatever, it was very interesting during the periods of time when I wasn't going outside and doing that versus when I was, even though I had to kind of change my schedule because I'm actually not still down with being around people unmasked, so I'd go out when people were not around. It made just an immense difference. And so that's one of the things that I've really been leveraging in the last year, I guess, has been going, okay, I know this is real. So that thing that we talk about, or different people talk about, how you think more clearly when you're walking. There's been a number of kind of famous philosophers who have mentioned this, that they get all their best ideas when they're walking. That's real. And it's an incredibly powerful leverage point.
That is interesting. I wonder, I have so many different thoughts around this. So we take this concept of the optimal flow, right? The body in motion. As magical practitioners, I think sometimes we forget how embodied these practices are. So thinking along the lines of witchcraft and sorcery, how do we optimize? That's a double optimal, right? Optimize this idea of like optimal flow. Take it from neuroscience and turn it into our craft.
And just to make sure, it's like it's optical flow. It's the flow of visuals of the spaces around you passing your eyes.
Yeah, I said that wrong. Yeah, totally. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, hold on a second here. Somebody been messing with my microphone. Okay, we're good. Podcasting problems 101. So, where were we?
Oh, talking about, you were talking, can I say something about, as magicians, kind of this optimizing our work using this?
Yeah. So thinking about optical flow, like how do we bring that from neuroscience into our sort of practices as magical users?
One of the things that is interesting to me, because again, I never got it, it never clicked, is one of the things that is big in some schools of Buddhism is walking meditation, which is kind of doing that same process that you do sitting, but really being fully aware of yourself walking slowly through space. And I know some people time how many steps they take per breath in and breath out. I haven't dug super deeply into that, but one of the things that I've been doing a lot of is going out into the world with intentions, like magical intentions. Not concretizing it before I'm out there, but really kind of going out, and maybe I'll walk for 5 minutes and then bring it up, going to my allies, going, this is what I'm working on. And I keep walking. I'm a little bit out in the sticks. So for me, I'm able to find, stones and things along the paths that I walk, along the roads that I walk. But it's not necessary. But I find that what happens is I'll get some idea of resolution or sometimes kind of a clear statement of intent, more or less, that hits in that. And then I'll sit with that concept, and I'll either grab a stone and kind of anchor it to the stone if I want to make something more talismanic. But usually I just kind of walk it and refine that statement and play with that statement and go, is that not trying to be uptight about it, not is this the perfect statement of intent, because that can mess people up, but does this feel the most like this thing that I'm looking for resolution wise? And then I'll continue the walk, kind of letting that play. So in a way, it's almost a form of petition magic or sigil magic, but done mostly internally. That has been hugely helpful. Listening to Huberman, I started listening to him right around the time I was doing a layout on Weaving Fate. It made me really wonder if that's where that image of the corridor came from. Because even though that's an imagined version of this, that process of walking through the hallway or walking through the path in the forest. And yeah, it kind of tied me into a lot of different kind of journeying or path working experiences that I've had that for me, I don't tend to just pop into. I can do it if I really want to, and I feel pressed on time or whatever. It's like there are places, let's just pick the north, that I'll do trance journeys into. And in general, I walk it. And this really brought that to mind. Like, is that part of what that process is? Is that imaginal process of moving through space, even in the other world? Does that allow that process to happen? Does it allow me to move into the other world more?
I would be really curious
Cleanly.
to know if the visualization of moving through space triggers that effect, because as a hypnotist, I know, like, if I tell this to my clients all the time, like, if I give you a lemon, take a bite out of a lemon, put you in an MRI and take a picture of your brain, it lights up in a pretty predictable fashion.
Mm-hmm.
If we put you in that same MRI and have you imagine you have a lemon, taking a big bite out of it, feel the sourness on your tongue, the juices, feel your cheeks start to, tighten and saliva start to build, and really imagine experiencing that lemon, as I always do every time I say it. And your brain will light up in that same kind of predictable fashion, but it will bring more resources to bear. Mm-hmm. Almost as if the imagined experience becomes more real to your neurological system. And I mean, Dr. Huberman would have to answer that side of the question, but for me, it's very, very useful in helping people create change, because I know essentially your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and imagined, and what's imagined, as we magic using people know, is more powerful than people give credit.
Right. Yeah, it's that whole thing that I first heard in Videodrome, which, really gross horror movie from the early 80s, and pretty disturbing probably for some people. So it's not you want to read a little bit about that if you're not super into horror. It's not a blanket recommendation at all. Some fucked up shit in that film. But yeah, the guy that part of the thing that goes on is the kind of madman at the center of that, Brian Oblivion. He says something. He says, television is the retina of the mind's eye. And whatever we see on the television screen, we perceive as reality. And that idea has always stuck with me. And I think that this is true in those imaginal works. And I think that's why I think I've always attended into magical practices where that's a big piece. Because I think that that's where I see personally, to me, it's way less about the materia. It's way less about having the right props or the right system. It's about how deeply can I invest my inner experience into what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that again is like, if we look at right now, it's fascinating because we've moved all of these things into place where a ton of people live in their cell phones more than they live in the world. You know,
Yeah.
a ton of us live in, and this is not suggesting we shouldn't pay attention to it, but into large swaths of society or subculture or whatever that we will never have any physical contact with, which doesn't make it unreal. You and I have a very real relationship, I think, you know, that we've never met in the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's easy to think that a lot of online experience replaces something that it doesn't. And I think that that's a very big piece of kind of being well in the world right now. Is like, for me, I'm, you know this, I'm mostly off of social media. And it's necessary for my well-being at this point in time to do that. And what it's done is it's given me space to realize the things that do matter to me and the people that do matter to me and where I'm showing up in my life or maybe not showing up in my life. And not saying that that's going to be the path everybody's is going to want to take or needs to take or will take, but it's something to consider. Like, where is our focus? When it's very clear that there's a lot of money being made off of our distraction and off of controlling our focus. And I think that even if you don't want to go, I don't take that as a conspiracy thing. That's a capitalist thing. And perhaps we could view capitalism as a conspiracy, but that's not where I'm going here. It's just, there's money to be made and someone's going to make that. And they've got very good tools for it right now. So I think another piece is really reclaiming our focus and reclaiming our attention. You know, because without, you know, I in Changeling, I talked about that when I'm talking about intention and attention, right? The intention is, what are you going to do, basically? And your attention is, what are you going to pay attention to? Literally, what are you going to look at? What are you going to care for? And if that's controlled by outside forces, be that, you know, social media or digital companies, you're kind of making an agreement that it's good to think about the degree you want to make it. Like, do you want to give up that degree of your attention? And again, everybody's going to have a different threshold of what works for them and what doesn't. I know people that don't have phones and don't have computers because their threshold for that is very, very low. Mine is much higher than that, but much lower than a lot of other people's.
Mm-hmm.
Just because that's what works for me. It's not even ideological. It's just like what allows me to function.
And that goes into another thing that we discussed in email, I think is a good idea to move into. And it follows that line of thinking really well. When you said, you know, you wanted to think about the idea of you have to find your own way. Mm-hmm. And I think that idea is inherent in your writing. From 6 Ways to Weaving Fate to now Changeling. I think that's a consistent theme.
I would
for
say.
Sure. But I mean, to discuss it, I guess, to open it up more, you're thinking less prescriptive and more like really digging into yourself and figuring out what it means to you to have more quality of life and magic, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because and it made sense to talk to you on this because I see the same thing in you. You know, it's pretty clear. Yeah, I think again, it's. I believe I'm a little older than you, but we kind of came up in a similar time, kind of before so much of this online world was really developed, and one of the things that led to, I think, was a lot of what gets called eclecticism. That unless you stumbled into that coven or that tradition or that lineage that you then stuck with. You didn't have much choice except to go your own way to some degree. I think if we look at most of the books from when I was first getting into magic, they were far less clear. They were far less prescriptive, unless you're looking at like Golden Dawn ceremonial stuff, which was pretty straightforward. Because most everybody was winging it to some degree, still there, and well, maybe not admitting it. They were on the earlier edge of that. And so I do think that is a really interesting question. And I'm going to say first on the personal level and then on the magical level. Though they're hard to separate for me. I'm like you, I'm pretty immersed, you know. But yeah, that question of the things that matter to you are totally individual. We have some, you know, whether we're looking at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or things like that, you know, there's going to be some baseline stuff that we share. But based on each of our past history and where we were maybe nurtured as we were growing up, as well as our nature as we were growing up, we're going to have different influences just on that level. And all of that stuff is shifting every day and based on every experience. I was talking to somebody who has had basically an entirely academic career from the word go, versus me who mostly had, you know, retail and customer service and stuff. And so there's aspects of our lives that they have no idea what I'm talking about. I have no idea what they're talking about. And functionally, we kind of need each other because I can explain some parts of the world that they don't understand. And they have a vast range of experience that I don't understand, but prescriptions that would work for me in my life wouldn't necessarily work for them or even necessarily make sense. And so that it is that idea, because I think we're in a really fascinating moment in magic because of so much information online. And there's like so many different camps that are so entrenched. And then there's everybody else. In my experience is that the everybody else is actually the largest group, but they're the least vocal group. And so it can seem like you really have to hardline decide, am I a pantheist? Am I a polytheist? You know, am I an animist? And do I think the chair is a spirit? How about the digital clock? You know, these things can seem like they're really important global questions. And to me, they're really not. They're like, you might be all those things, and maybe you're something there's no word for. So that's kind of the short form of that whole thing. And I think about your approach to Northern magic is why it came up. Like, I know you have a somewhat peculiar approach to Northern magic versus what someone might find in most books.
Yes. Yes, I do. And yet I find myself constantly in leadership positions of, you know, heathen organization, specifically the Troth, but, you know, my approach is, even when I've been associated with organizations in different kindreds, like, it doesn't mesh, like, equal up, like whole square, they don't fit quite right. Close enough, they're shapes, right, in the same region of things, but they don't quite fit. Never does. I'm always the kind of like that odd guy out.
Right, totally.
I am. I don't know if that's, and I think about this a lot too, because I mean, you talk about, hey, I'm 44, I'll be 45 in May. So, I mean, we're close enough in age. We went through some of those similar experiences online early on. And I don't know, I think about this a lot because when I got into magic and the occult and stuff, I wasn't raised to be anything. And that's just where my curiosity took me and stuck. And I've tried my hand at specific training systems, and diligently so. Like, when I went in, I went all in. I mean, I've done the ADF dedicant program and I liked it. I loved it, in fact, but it's not me. There's elements of it that are great. I've done Jason's programs, which I think are top notch, excellent. And still, there's plenty of it that's just not me, not my application. Within heathenry, I've been, like I said, I've been part of a couple different kindreds, and I've helped build things. And aside from the basic skeleton framework of it all, like I've just got my own way of doing things. I've got my own way of working with the runes and so on. So there's something about me. I don't know if this is a product of how I grew up with a problem with authority for a good reason, or if there's something more inherent to my character at a soul level almost, right? That puts me at the outside edge of things instead. I don't know. I think about that a lot.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I wonder, because we share that I was really not raised anything. And I wonder what effect that has. That would be an interesting PhD study for somebody who's looking at our whole end of the world. Is like, do the people that grew up in a kind of pretty solidly centered religious structure seek that out when they switch gears? You know, it's an interesting question. And I have the same authority issue to the point of it's not strictly a benefit.
Yeah.
I can take that far too far.
I can too. I mean, I could slide on that spectrum too far, and I recognize that I do it when I can look at, say, a spiritual authority in any tradition, you name it. I don't care, from Wicca to Catholicism and anything in between. Just give me an authority, and I'll have some inherent distrust of them because they hold too much power to influence people to do harm to other people, if they so choose.
Right.
Yeah, within the bones of a system, people who are all in, and please don't think I'm insulting any of you, because I'm not. I just have this inherent distrust of it all to some level that makes me not play well with others, I guess, all the time.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And so, yeah, I was trying to think from kind of a, so I wonder if one of the things that would be really an interesting thing to throw out for people to play with, and I'd love to hear feedback if anybody has any, kind of like, I can see why I have problems with really structured religious structures. I know what that is. I've got there. And I would love to know how many people have kind of looked at that in themselves, whether that's the same thing or they have kind of the reverse thing. I have kind of I'm sure there are people, I have an ingrained issues with eclecticism. So I've talked to you. I know you're out there. And it is an interesting thing. And it's not saying that there's any right or wrong here. And that's why it ties into that finding your own way thing. It is like, it seems like more and more, which is weird to me, like we've got more than twice the people on the planet since I was born, and we now know that there are a gazillion more options for ways to be in the world, whether that's sexuality or whether that's religion or whether that's philosophy or whether that's gender position or identity or things like that. And yet it seems like there is a massive backlash against that, even with the people that are, I'm not going to, taking advantage isn't the correct word, but maybe it is, taking advantage of the fact that, you and I, we could say that we're magicians now in a way that maybe we couldn't have 50 years ago. And to be having this conversation that'll go public. It's very interesting that we seem to still have the same, at least a lot of people seem to have the same impulse to kind of calcify into those self-identities, those self-definitions, which I find very interesting because it's not my approach. And again, I don't think that that's, I'm not saying my way is the right way because I don't think that, but it's just an interesting thing to, again, look at. Like, if you read my stuff and you find it of use, but you are a kind of by nature or inclination, a kind of a hardline polytheist, I don't see any issue there in adjusting anything that I've written to work for you within that sphere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the same thing, it's like I've had people come up going like, well, I'm an atheist and you talk about spirits all the time. And I go, well, does atheism preclude spirits? You know, this is an interesting question. And for some it does. For some it doesn't. Yeah, and so it becomes a really interesting process, because then we can look at, this is rolling back to, you have to find your own way in magic. I think there's also I see a lot of assumptions that we might practice towards for the same reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily think that's true either. You know?
No. No. I don't know about you, but my first, I have to do something with magic because it has to work. I don't have another option. I was so powerless in the situation. It was the last thing that came to me, and the first thing that I knew had to work, because I wasn't going to murder someone. Although now that I think about curses, good. Was a curse.
Mm-hmm.
Fight back out of a desperate place of harm to protect myself with the only thing I could think to lash out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what hooked me on magic forevermore, because not only did it worked real well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've been hooked ever since. So I didn't come into magic for the same reasons other people did.
Right. And we've
Yeah.
talked about it, but I came into it because I was having these very intense experiences, and I needed to try and understand what they were, was one part. And then two, it was that while I was looking to try and figure out what the fuck was going on with me, I began coming across books that talked about a way of being in the world that actually made sense to me for the first time. You know, and so I didn't really come in trying to either hex somebody or get somebody to fall in love with me. These are very common first moves, you know. For me, I was like, what the fuck is going on? And is there some way to not be driven mad by what I'm experiencing? Because that's what it felt like, because I didn't know what it was, you know.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, wait a second. There's this whole chunk of the planet, you know, as I dove into Native spirituality and Native American spirituality, looking at that, and then looking at anthropology of different shamanic cultures and different tribal cultures, and coming across books on things like African traditional religions in the US and all that stuff, I went, wait a second. I've been trying to fit into this kind of 1950s based American capitalist materialist model, and being completely fucked up and confused by it. It didn't make any sense to me. To going, oh, that isn't even, it's not a choice between this and communism, or this and socialism, or this and Catholicism, or this and evangelical Christianity, or this, and it's like there's a billion different angles of approach to the world. And I found that the more magical sides of that simply worked for me. And it wasn't, and so again, I think a lot of the stuff that I've dug into, and it shows up in my books, like you said, is like, I'm very driven to use this stuff to understand myself, to understand my world, to change myself, and to change my world, kind of in that order.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's totally different. If I was like living under a bridge with nowhere to live and no job and no money, my focus would be very different, at least for a while.
Yeah, you're not wrong. it different needs, different requirements, and you know, sometimes if you're in a desperate situation, living under a bridge, homeless or whatever, and you've tried everything. People joke when they come to see me as a hypnotist, I'm the last person they come to.
Mm-hmm.
They've already seen the doctor. They've seen a psychologist. They've seen a neuroscientist. I mean, I've helped people who have had horrible injuries come back and get their health back, get their
Mm-hmm.
life back. And they never think to come to me first. I'm the
Mm-hmm.
witch doctor in their eyes, right?
Absolutely.
So, different requirements. So if the Golden Dawn, that big old thick book, lands in somebody's lap who's in that desperate situation, how much is it really going to help them? Will they think it's still impossible and out of reach versus Six Ways landing in their lap?
Yeah,
I
I was
think
going to
now,
say. I
yeah,
was going to
now,
say you take that puppy to the occult shop and you trade it in for something that's a little more immediately useful. You pick up
yeah,
a good book on hoodoo.
yeah, or
Yeah.
even, I mean, like Changeling now is. I think Changeling for your series of books is the actual companion to Six Ways. Weaving Fate always felt like a standalone to me system.
Mm-hmm.
But this is definitely, I think, it's got plenty of practice in it, but it's more of how to think along with the practices, I think, that are placed in Six Ways too.
It was interesting. You write the book. In my experiences, you write the book and then you go through it through the editing process and all that to such a degree that you no longer see the book as a book. It's like, have I fixed the things that have to be fixed?
Yeah.
As much as I can before I get it published, and then the next year, the rest of them will expose themselves, and we'll see about getting them corrected. But and before I talked to Luxa, I dove back into Changeling, and I was like, oh yeah, this is totally the companion book to Six Ways. Like I didn't even see it at the time I was writing it, but I could see it. I was like, oh yeah, this is like a much deeper dive into those two sentences in Six Ways.
Yeah.
And so I totally see that.
Yeah. I think it's done well to expand out on things too. Like I think about my own situation, because one thing I love that you've done in Changeling is including, you break down, here's what I'm talking about in a chapter. Here's why it's important. Here's praxis. Here's how you apply it in your life. Here are a series of questions to really dig into your own reasons and thinking on this and challenge yourself on why you're here and what you're doing. And like when I was reading it, I think back to my beginning, and you have a chapter in there, A Witch Seeks Power. Well, goddamn right I did. I was reaching for it. I found it, and it worked. And that's kind of how you go throughout the book. You have a witch seeks all these different things, and explore how people can apply that. And I have this thorn sticking in my head from something you said earlier. I don't want to leave it unsaid for some reason.
Pull it out.
Because you're talking about all the different places in the world and different traditions and different ways of expressing yourself and so on. And it's one of those things I've been thinking about a lot, because in my own experiments, interacting with the field in a magical way, how malleable it is. I call it the quintessence. No new word here. Greeks gave us that one, right? But it's just the best word, I think, for what I think is making up. If we were to actually hold the threads of what is the field, it's quintessence that makes up those threads, in my view. So as you tap into that and it influences you, like I think that's how different environments, different things arise. But beyond that, like I got in a discussion recently with people who were talking about how hauntings in particular happen. Imagine that I'm in that discussion. So they were making it so human centric, like saying humans are tapping into this and it's memories of humans and it's this because humans and humans. And I'm like, how do you know it's not because the crow decided that there needed to be more intermingling of the other world and ours in that location? It hadn't fuck all to do with you. Like, how do you know that? I don't know. It's it's one of those things that was sticking in my head
I think that's a
again.
really interesting question, because I think that yeah, it's one of the things that it might be the thing that I actually like best about kind of taking an animist approach is at some point something should click in your head, in my opinion, because oh, wait a second, this indicates that I am not the center of the universe,
Right?
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the great powers of that worldview is because I think as a magician you can see it in practice, right? If you begin playing, and I talk about this, I know, and I think both Six Ways and Changeling, that you can play as if, begin acting as if animism is a correct model and see what happens. And most people that do that come to the thing that this is at least highly effective. But if there's a certain point where you go, okay, if there's all sorts of stuff that is infused with consciousness and spirit, however we want to describe that, why is it all about us?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the biggest issue that we have probably right now when we look at issues like climate change and environmental destruction and things like that, is that we really have a very difficult time decentering ourselves and going, okay, yeah, we're important, that we accept that. We have a perception of ourselves and our cultures and our families and all that, and that matters. But it's far and away from the only thing that matters. And then we get the other side, which is like, we're vermin and should all be destroyed, which I don't agree with either of them. But it is a very interesting thing, because I've had that too. Like, I've come into spaces that I thought I was dealing with a ghost. And this has only happened to me twice. And in both cases, it was not. It was definitely like a very active land spirit that I think it had old interactions with humans. Because one of them was near the site of a very old cabin ruin in Arizona. And I found that there was this thing near there, and I thought it was a ghost, or like I said, I thought it was a ghost of one of the people in there, but I think it was the land spirit there that had learned from those people how to interact with us. And then a very similar thing happened in a swamp in New Orleans at the site of where there were foundations from a very old house out in the swamps. That I think it was the same thing. I didn't get as clear of a message from that one, but I think that was some kind of a land spirit or attached to the site spirit that just simply learned how to communicate in more human form from the fact that people lived there for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My point is always, we have agency, we have power, we have access to power, and we have our own sovereignty to a point. But we're not the only player in town. We may not even be the one with the biggest teeth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And when it comes to the weird, crows are definitely one thing to look for. Ravens, that whole family. You think they don't open up doors and act as a crossroads themselves? You are sourly mistaken. You look, if you're checking out, if you're out in the woods and you find a place that feels powerful for some reason, strange, weird, it could be any number of things.
Mm-hmm.
It could just be because mushrooms grow there.
Yes.
Like they're fucking weird too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think all sorcery is local. It just harkens back to that. And the more you understand local is a big word, the better.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think that ties into the thing that we were talking about earlier, that because we're embodied spirits, it's all embodied, which, your feet on the street, your feet are on the ground, you are where you are. And I would throw that in and just as another thing too, that accepting that right now, and really anchoring to that at this moment in time where there is so much change and so much kind of traumatic change. This is going on in the world all the time. It's just affecting perhaps a larger group overall. or a group that we have more information about. This is not what's going on in the Ukraine is not been going on in parts of the world that most of us don't pay a lot of attention to.
That's fair. Yep.
Is really finding that anchor in the present. Like, where are you right now? Like, especially you would know this because of your work with anxiety. Anxiety isn't about presence. At least not in my experience. It's like, it's about the absence of presence, right? It's like, you're focused on something that either is done and you can't stop looking at, or you think might be coming. So finding that way to be present in the body, be present in the moment, is just crucial.
Yeah. Absence of present. That is a fantastic way to sum that particular problem up. Yeah, you get caught up in I call it, I relate it to spiraling, like spiraling down. Like one trigger makes you start to spiral, and now you've gone off into a memory or an anxiety about the future or something that's never happened or may happen or could have happened. And that feeds into another one. And before you know it, you're just referencing things. The more you try to pull back, you're still caught up in the illusion of it all. It's a vicious thing.
Do you work, this is something I don't think we've ever talked about. Do you work with anything, and I'm going to use the term that is best known, and then we can go from there, but do you work with anything like affirmations?
Yes. But not, I don't stand in a mirror and do.
I don't either.
I can't even think of what they are. Like the classical ones. You are brave. You are. Yeah. I do sometimes. I mean, well, for one, centering work, right? I stand at my altar every day. I take my deep breaths and I equal arm cross myself because I like the motion of it all. And I say, I stand at the crossroads and I am that. And it goes into my ritual. So, I mean, that works in the line of affirmation, right?
Yep.
In hypnosis, we do what's called direct suggestion.
Yep.
As part of it, you are a non-smoker because you no longer smoke. Now, if that worked for you and you're listening, send me $300.
No, I think that's really important. One of the things that I have versions of these things and I play with them all the time, but because I have a tendency to be a little bleak about the future, and this can overtly interfere with my life if I let that just run. And again, like you said, it's just a spiral. I've had visions of that stuff since I was a kid, so it's like it's a very deeply ingrained spiral. But and so I have this thing that I wake up, and most mornings I tell myself what my attitude about life is. Like, I have whatever the term of the week is, something going. I view all aspects and parts of myself as blah 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 blah. And it totally helps me out. So that's something to play with. It ties into the things you can do right now. That's not hard. But don't go looking for the shit online. Try and figure out what language speaks to you. Like, it can be really odd. A lot of the charms in Changeling are kind of like that. They can be charms. It doesn't have to be affirmation style. It doesn't have to be I am super badass. And incredibly wealthy and hot. It can be whatever it is that speaks to you. And again, for me, mostly it's about what's my actual outlook on life. That's the thing that I'm always interested in shaping, because that opens up so many doors.
And you're right. And again, it goes back to our theme, what works for you. Because, I mean, one of the ways I control my anxiety when it hits me is because things have gotten too mundane. They've gotten too real. They've gotten too close. And some of the triggers I have around some events, without revealing too much detail, causes me to spiral down. So one way I counteract that, and this may not work for other people because this might trigger someone else's anxiety for all I know, but I I look up at the sky. That's step one. Step two is I put my mind as far out into space above our planet as I can muster the visualization. I'm trying to get an image in my mind of being above Earth, seeing Earth in its entirety, and contemplating what it means to be on a planet that's moving through space in a galaxy, through a universe, instead of being a guy who has to go to work and drive a car and navigate the streets and worry about getting hit or anything like that. Now it's something else, and it feels really cool to me.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah, and I like to think about one of my things. People think I'm really weird all the time. Imagine that. So
you say that
yeah,
like it's a bad thing.
yeah, and just my trip to where I work every day. You pass people, everything. You're interacting in the world. Everyone's going about their day. I'm going to work to and from, but I pass houses that have every human emotion on display on my way there. Right? There could be people making love in one home and having fights in another, and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
There's an entire subculture in this area of meth and heroin users and manufacturing and distributing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's quite dangerous for what it is, and it exists as its own community unto itself within the community. It's another layer of the place, but people don't think about it until you run right up against it. They have their own networks. They have, they
Yep.
have their own rules and regulations of existence. And there are some places I know are associated with that on my way to work, just as there is a big several county training center for law enforcement on my way to work. And it humors me to think that those worlds, they intermingle, but they don't actually exist in the same areas, because again, they're all interacting with the world by their own rules, regulations, mindsets, and so on. Not to mention, people like us and the people who are fervently religious, and like, no one's living in the same world.
Right. No, totally.
Nobody.
Totally.
So oddly enough, that calms me down. It eases back any anxiety I have just to think about how different the world is for everyone.
Yeah, like for me, I know I've got again, they're funny things that are like animist habits that I can also tie into that. I praise the fuck out of trees. Like I'm so into trees, and it's and again, ravens and crows, like you said, like I have so many conversations with that part of the world, and I don't get too much back that is knowable, but that shit does that same thing to me. It kind of takes me out of my myopia,
Mm-hmm.
my belief that that not only am I the center of not only am I the little spindle in the center of the LP that everything is moving towards, but I may not even be in that position whatsoever in the grander scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting thing. But I do think, being able to change that perspective and realizing how much our perspective drives everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's that thing I think I talk about it in every book that I've written, probably, that like part of the problem is we see what we want to see or what we think we should see or we think we're gonna see. And until we break that, for most of us, that's not going to be the most optimal point of view, because it means we're missing a lot of information and we're misinterpreting a lot of information.
Right. Whew. Boy, we have gone deep in this one, haven't we?
It's good.
So I think this is going to be a good place to stop the normal broadcast. We have done an excellent job of not talking a lot about your book while also talking a lot about your book, strangely enough.
Very good.
because Changeling is full of qualities and ways to challenge yourself, and I think it's excellently done. I remember when I got to read, before it was finished,
Mm-hmm.
and you have done a remarkable job building this out. Once again, hit a home run, my friend. I
Thank
dig
you so
it.
much.
Yeah, and I really want everyone to go out there and get it. I mean, everyone that listens knows you show up my show one way or another every damn episode, it seems. So, so where can people find you these days? You're not real active on social media anymore.
I'm pretty much as much offline as I can be.
Yeah.
I'm still out there, but just kind of keeping. Yeah, I kind of hit the place where it's like I realized, like, okay, my primary interest is in writing, and then doing things like this, talking to you. I think that that's where I can be the most use, and it keeps me from getting overly involved in the kind of day-to-day, sometimes a whack of the social media. I still have all my accounts, but I don't really post very often.
Yeah. Your website's
still up and running. Website's still up and running. That'll always be there. I think I've kind of made it through the I can't write another word experience that happens when I write a book. So the blog will probably occasionally have content again soon.
Yeah. And hey, speaking of Aidan's writings, the first person to send to me at weirdwebradio@gmail.com a direct link to something that Aidan wrote on Chaos Matrix website gets a free tarot reading.
Nice.
So happy hunting, friends. It's not under his name. Good luck.
Very good.
Yeah, that'll be a fun little scavenger hunt out there. See people do it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, and yeah, I really appreciate what you do in the world, and I think you're a really helpful and positive and important voice in the community.
I'm humbled by that. I thank you. I'll take it, especially from you, my friend. And the feeling's absolutely mutual. What a big fan I am of your work, and of course our friendship. And I wish you nothing but the best of success.
And to you as well, man.
Any and every damn thing I can do to help along the way, I'm there. So we're heading to Patreon, my dear friends, and since Aidan's been here more than a few times, we are going to have a special conversation about what Aidan calls the shallows, the other world, and ways to interact with them in a practical, magical kind of way. Go to weirdwebradio.com, click join the membership, or patreon.com/weirdwebradio to join the fun. Thank you as always for listening, and stay weird out there, my friends. And now it is bonus audio time. Aidan Wachter, welcome back to all the bonus stuff.
Yay.
Yay. Yeah. Now, as the audio everyone just heard, if they listen to it all on the way out, says, I'm going to ask you the most common question. I don't think I've asked it in a while. I'm kind of curious if you'll answer it the same. What famous person's resting place do you most want to visit?
I don't think he's probably. I don't even know if he's probably in a resting place yet. But
do you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife, what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions, magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram at weirdwebradio.
You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun, and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.